Kia ora koutou, it's whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hero News. Kia ora, Chewy.
Kia ora, Pat.
How you
How you
doing?
doing?
Oh, I'm still in
I'm
Santa's
actually,
grotto, as you can see.
I'm actually a little bit traumatized.
Oh,
I
why is that?
thought, what better way to relax in between work and the show than to sit down and watch a lovely documentary to make myself feel smart and to just relax.
Yeah.
I chose one called 2,000 Meters to Andreevka.
Oh, okay.
And I feel like I have been in a trench battle. That movie is intense.
Wow.
I don't know
Wow.
if you've seen it,
No.
but it's covering part of a small unit's attempt to liberate a Ukrainian village. And
Okay, wow.
as the title suggests, they have to go 2,000 meters. And just really illustrates how hellish the fighting in Ukraine is. Literally at maybe arm's length at some stages.
Yeah.
Just, I am not relaxed.
So what you're saying
a
is the
phenomenal piece of
fufu is
work.
quite close to the surface and
Oh
it
my
could blow
God.
very easily. Hey, should we talk about the COVID inquiry then? Just because the fufu is right there and the media coverage. Should we do that with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Well, let's
have stayed away from the news today, so I've only
oh,
seen the edges and specifically National appearing to do a fucking victory lap over the results of this. So I imagine that the report just says everything was bad, done terribly, has forever changed and damaged this country. Am I correct in that assumption?
yeah, everything's bad. The world's going to hell in a
Right.
handbasket.
Okay.
I think Armageddon has officially started,
Well,
and it's
we better
all
stick with this
because of
government
Jacinda.
then, eh?
Yeah, we
We
do
should
behind the
definitely
nation.
stick with Labour,
Yeah,
with National and just not look into it, right?
that's the way. Well, funnily enough, we are going to look into it tonight. Of course, we do have Leader of the Opposition, Chris Hipkins, with us, and we are talking specifically the COVID response, the report that came out. There's a lot of interesting headlines in the media at the moment that don't seem to necessarily correlate to what the report says, but the headlines are interesting. So we'll
That's
just rip straight
good.
into this. Yeah, we'll rip straight
Yep.
into this. But of course, just for people who weren't here last night, I am up in the lounge in Santa's grotto. For the whole week actually. My wife has got COVID, ironically, so she is kept it thematic with us tonight, and she's downstairs chilling out. That's where the studio is. So the other thing is, don't have internet. I'm operating from a laptop, so we hope everything works tonight. We certainly can talk, so Chippy will come on. We'll see how the rest of it goes as it goes. But later on tonight, we're going to have a look at Mariameno Kapa-Kingi, her expulsion. I put in the title or the graphics illegal, but I think the news referred to it as unlawful is probably a better word. And Nicola Willis this morning on Big Herald News was terrible, and she's been learning the art of not answering the questions. Like she's got scholarships in that based on this morning's performance. So we'll have a bit of a look at that, because there was some interesting things they were trying to talk about as well. They were talking about tax, the tax on petrol being cut. Should we do it? And also the debt to GDP ratio, which we might ask Chris about as well. So let's rip into it. Let's get into it. And welcome to the show, Leader of the Opposition, Christopher Hipkins. Kia ora, Chris.
Kia ora, how are you guys?
Yeah, we're
Good,
doing all
mate.
right.
Good to have you
Doing
back.
all right. Good to have you back.
Good.
Yeah. I think I want to start this show by just giving out some of the reporting of today's release, and then giving you space to speak to it before we maybe come in with some of our own one-on-one questions. So what we'll do to start with is we'll just go to stuff.co.nz, who did an okay report. They kind of reported what the report said in one of their articles. It was pretty good. And here are some key points that I've taken out of their report of the report. The report found that New Zealand's COVID-19 response saved thousands of lives, but the spread of misinformation and the government's use of compulsion to control it meant the country would struggle to manage a similar national emergency again. Later in the article, the government's broad approach to vaccines was solid and based in evidence. That's what it is, Chewy. It's because the last government used evidence and these guys are allergic to it. That's what a part of the thing is. The report noted that several submitters were concerned the development of COVID-19 vaccines was rushed and important safeguards were abandoned. However, on balance, the government's decision to adopt a vaccine strategy early on in the pandemic was appropriate and consistent with overwhelming scientific advice. The commission found they concluded that decision makers, this is the people doing the report concluded, that decision makers carefully balanced the benefits of COVID-19 vaccines against any potential risks. The commission went on to review MedSafe's process of approving the vaccines and praised it, Chewy. MedSafe was agile and adaptive in its regulation of COVID-19 vaccines during the pandemic. This allowed rapid approval of a vaccine without taking shortcuts. Two more quick paragraphs. Once the vaccines were being used and rare but serious side effects like myocarditis were occurring, the commission noted that decision-making took extensive steps to mitigate risks and strengthen systems for monitoring their safety. And finally, and I think this is probably one of the things we want to talk about, Chris, is the vibe we're getting from National at the moment is kind of summed up in this little comment from Simeon Brown. Lockdowns, the elimination strategy worked, but was hard to exit. On the 2021 lockdowns, the core issue identified by the Commission appears to be when the elimination approach should have ended. Elimination strategies can be very beneficial in terms of preventing large numbers of deaths and hospitalizations, but they are difficult to exit, the report noted. Speaking on Tuesday, Simeon Brown highlighted the finding that, quote, Auckland remained in lockdown and separated from the rest of the country for longer than officials needed. We will talk about this now as we go through. Chris, I've seen reports that say 6 days too long. Auckland was in lockdown for 6 days too long. Another report that says they were in lockdown 4 days too long. But it does seem to be the one thing that Simeon Brown in particular is holding on to, saying, see, this was so bad. This was really bad because Auckland was in lockdown for too long. So there's some of the actual findings as reported on by Stuff. The ball is in your court. Your thoughts and reactions to this report and its release today.
Well, I think first up, I mean, I'll confess I was pleasantly surprised by where the Royal Commission landed up, because their terms of reference had been carefully designed, I guess, to reflect, to produce a report that would reflect negatively on the last government. Totally. And it's a credit to the three people who were running that Royal Commission that I think they by and large rose above that terms of reference and still produced a report that stacks up pretty well based on scientific evidence, stacks up pretty well based on a fair, objective view of, you know, what the strengths of our response were and where there are lessons to learn for next time around. So I was, you know, broadly comfortable with the report. That's not to say I agree with absolutely all of it, and you know we get into some of those. But actually, right at the beginning of the report, I'll quote, you know, because I think this is something you won't see in Simeon Brown's press release. But you know, it's a direct quote here. Evidence shows New Zealand had among one of the best pandemic responses in the world. Now, that was the conclusion of a Royal Commission set up by a current government, effectively to persecute a previous government.
Well, it's not even that, Chris. It's kind of set up by Winston Peters wanting to pay back his supporters who were very vaccine hesitant into the anti-vaccine, anti-lockdown, anti-mandate part. That was what he promised them, to pay them back. And I agree with you. From where it was kind of set up from, it was kind of glowing, to be honest, from where it was set up from. Not saying perfect, but from what the expectations would have been of those supporters, it kind of gives them nothing.
Yeah, and particularly, you know, the terms of reference were carefully crafted to exclude all decisions that Winston Peters was part of making. So basically all of the decisions around COVID that were made prior to the 2020 election, when Winston Peters was the Deputy Prime Minister, were explicitly excluded from the terms of reference of this Second Royal Commission. So,
That's
it was
snake.
pretty heavily loaded. But some of the headlines I think have been a bit, by and large, I think the reporting of it's been fairly balanced. I think that stuff report that you just highlighted was pretty balanced. There is an area where I disagreed with the Royal Commission, which was around their findings that the Auckland lockdown, that last sort of 4, 5, 6 days, was against public health advice. That's actually not true. So what
Right.
happened there was, as with all of those lockdown decisions, where they went to cabinet with some notice, I would produce a cabinet paper that would be distributed. Several days later, the cabinet would meet to discuss it. So typically the paper would be circulated, say, on a Thursday. Cabinet would meet on the Monday. By the time we met on the Monday, a whole lot more test results would be in, a whole lot more contact tracing results would be in, and the Director General, Ashley Bloomfield, would come along to cabinet and share the latest results and update the advice. But the updated advice would be done orally, because you wanted the most up-to-date information making the decision. So when he did come to cabinet, he recommended that we do that extra 6 days, and it was then announced. And he spoke to that at the press conference. And actually, if you go back, and I went back today just to check that I remembered this correctly, in the press conference, he said, my advice was to continue for this because of these reasons. And so the Royal Commission have relied on the cabinet papers rather than the advice that was actually presented at the cabinet meeting. So I don't blame the Royal Commission for that.
But Chris, here's the thing though. Even if that was wrong, let's give Simeon his bottle. Yeah, that was 6 days too long. I was talking about this on Twitter today, and I counted up 88 days that Auckland was in lockdown, and someone else said something like 127 in either level 3 or level 4. And all this government's got to say is 4 to 6 of those days was too many out of 120. So they're saying that you guys are only 97% okay. We're going to focus on that 3%. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and look, and to be fair, I think that lockdown, at the end of 2021 for Auckland did go on too long. So regardless of what the report says around what the advice we received was, I think actually when you can look back on it in hindsight, you can say, yeah, it would have been better if that had ended a bit earlier than it did. But what the Royal Commission had, which we didn't, was 2.5 years to basically look at all of the evidence, all of the advice, all of the stuff that's come out subsequently.
Hindsight,
we didn't have any of that when we were making those decisions. So, so I'm quite happy to sit here and say, look, hindsight's a wonderful thing. There's certainly lessons to learn. But one of the biggest lessons for me was you've got to make decisions under a huge amount of pressure with often very limited information. And my benchmark was always what's giving us the best chance of keeping people alive here. And I don't regret that for a moment. Keeping people alive worked. We had one of the lowest rates of death in the world. And 100%. If that's the standard that I think we should be judged by, I think we did pretty well.
Well, you tell me if this is fair, Chris. This is what I've said, we've kind of said on the show. We stayed in lockdown, or we had mandates or restrictions a bit longer than we needed to, but the payoff for that is more saved lives. Now, we could have come out earlier and maybe the economy would have rebounded a bit quicker, like some other countries did, but there would have been more dead New Zealanders. For me personally, I'm okay with a bit of a slower recovery and more people alive than a faster recovery and more people dead. Is that fair? Am I missing anything?
Yeah, I think you're missing the fact that the economy actually recovered remarkably well, even in spite of that. So we had we actually had the opposite problem to what the current government have had, and that the economy recovered too strongly, and that was a driver of inflation. It was a driver of a shortage of labour. Remember, we had employers saying we can't get enough workers because the economy is so strong that everybody has jobs and we need more workers. And that was a problem for us at that point. So our economy recovered stronger and faster than many others around the world. Of course, then Nicola Willis fixed it, and it all went downhill from there. So I mean, and look, let me just run you through these numbers. I did these in the house the other day, because the pre-election update compared to what the most recent updates are for the economy actually tells the story pretty well. By this point in the economic cycle, according to the pre-election update, these are not the government's numbers, these are Treasury's numbers that they produce independently. By the middle of this year, unemployment was expected to be 4.8%. Now that Nicola Willis has fixed it, it's expected to be 5.3%. The government's debt to GDP, which Nicola is obsessed about, in 2026 was forecast under Labor to be 40.4%. Now that Nicola Willis has fixed it, it's forecast to be 43.3%. So the debt to GDP is higher now that Nicola Willis has fixed it. In terms of the government's surplus, what they call the Obergall as a percentage of GDP, under Labor, it was forecast by this point to be almost back into surplus, so 0.3% in deficit. Now that Nicola Willis has fixed it, it's 3.7% in deficit. GDP growth under Labor was forecast to be 3.7%. Now that Nicola Willis has fixed it, 3.3%. Inflation was forecast to be 2.1%. Now that Nicola Willis has fixed it, it's 2.4%. So basically every single fundamental economic indicator now is worse than it was expected to be before the election.
We're actually going to talk about that a bit later on, because you said that this morning on New Zealand Herald, a version of that, and then Ryan Bridge asked Nicola Willis that, and so she responded to it, which we're going to do later on tonight. Just back to the report.
By not answering the question, because
that's exactly my setup. You
haven't as Christopher Luxon in avoiding the question and just saying, "Well, what I would say to you is,"
you've wet my gunpowder, Chris. I was keeping it dry.
You're going to have to tear up that part of your notes now, Pat. Chris has already done it for you.
Just to get back to the COVID report, and I want to give obviously Chewy a chance, but this is what I was going to say. This was also in one of the reports today. This is one of the conclusions or summaries on the report. Overall, this report concludes that Aotearoa New Zealand did well in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. On the whole, the decisions taken and the methods used during the COVID-19 response were considered and appropriate. What I haven't read the whole report. It's 1,000 pages, obviously, but from reading all the reports and the summaries, this is what I think, right? I think there's a we did well column and a we can do better column. And the we did well column is exponentially larger than the we can do better column. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. We were talking about this last night. Do you remember the film Sully, which was about the guy who landed the plane on the Hudson River?
Yep.
And he ended up with the tribunal basically saying, but actually, if you'd made a different decision, you could have landed safely at LaGuardia. And he said, yeah, but I'm a human being. Allow for the fact that I need a bit of time to digest all of the information. And once they gave him that time, in every scenario, the plane would have crashed had he not done what he did. In the case of COVID, it feels a little bit like that now. You can look back on it and say, oh, but you coulda, shoulda, woulda, based on plenty of time to think about it, based on all of the information that we now know that we didn't know at the time. And the reality is we were making decisions in a real hurry under huge pressure with imperfect information. I'm quite open to the fact that there are going to be findings that said, coulda, shoulda, woulda, things you could have done, lessons to be learned. Of course, there was no rule book here. We were literally having to figure out how to respond to this. The last time New Zealand had to respond to a pandemic of this size was over 100 years ago. There was literally no guidebook for it.
Yeah. Chewy, questions, sir? Questions, comments?
Whenever I see criticism of our COVID response, I just reflect on what was being said by National New Zealand First and ACT at the same period of time, right? For most of the pandemic response, they were either in lockstep with the government because I think they acknowledged how important it was, or were badgering you guys to be in some way tougher, sanction people that don't get the vaccine.
That was Peters, wasn't it?
All of this.
And
Peters was saying, and I think David Seymour was saying, pay people to do it. Use public money to pay people to get the vaccine. And then as it wore on, and as we got closer to the light at the end of the tunnel, and I guess the part where only Auckland was in lockdown, you see them starting to break ranks, going, okay, we're going to go back to normal, so we better get our hits in now. Do you think that that's kind of fair, that it's all sort of positioning for what they knew that was coming?
I think so. They certainly changed their position towards the end. I mean, let's go back to the beginning. Chris Bishop proposed that we should be spending billions of dollars building purpose-built managed isolation and quarantine facilities so that we could keep the border closed indefinitely. That's a fact. He actually put out a proposal that said we should be building purpose-built quarantine facilities.
I remember that.
Christopher Luxon was arguing that we should have been more generous with the wage subsidy, as were many other National Party figures at the time.
Well, let's not forget either. Simon Bridges was the first. He was the leader at the time, and he put up a Facebook post saying, "Come on, it's time to open the borders," and that cost him his leadership. The world, including all his Facebook supporters, said, "Pull your head in." That's where at one point National was at.
Yeah. And so, look, they regularly would have got this wrong if we had followed their advice. Routinely through the pandemic, they were basically, when it came to the border, Grant Robertson, I remember at the time, described them like a bored cat at a door. They wanted the door open, they wanted the door closed. They wanted the door open, they wanted the door closed, and that's how the National Party sort of reacted. David Seymour, you're right. He was saying that people who got vaccinated should get a tax bonus for being vaccinated. Winston Peters was arguing that people who were on a benefit who didn't get vaccinated should have their benefit cut. He was also saying that prisoners shouldn't be eligible for release unless they had been vaccinated. Now, of course, he's fully in with the anti-vaxxers, and he prefers to forget that that's what he was saying at the time. They basically shifted. They figured out that public opinion was going to shift away from the solidarity that we had, and they decided that they were just focused on dividing people off to try and get some political advantage.
It's almost like one part of the political spectrum was playing politics with it, and the other part was trying to keep people alive.
Well,
so
on some level.
I guess what I saw today was the government absolutely hammer their social media channels with this narrative that they're very clearly wanting to hammer home that you specifically did stuff wrong around COVID, especially around Auckland, and therefore you shouldn't be Prime Minister ever again. That's
I think
a pretty tenuous narrative from what we've been talking about tonight.
The Royal Commission report, which again, it was commissioned by them, their terms of reference, their handpicked people doing it, doesn't say that. In fact, it says the opposite. And there's another quote, actually, which I think, because it relates specifically to ministers, it says here, ministers and officials often had to work at breakneck pace to keep up with the rapidly changing environment and the multitude of tasks required to manage the response to the virus. The success of Aotearoa New Zealand's pandemic response, Winston would hate that, by the way, mentioning of Aotearoa, but most obviously measured in terms of New Zealand's low death rates and excess mortality, is a credit to the work and dedication and to the quality of the decisions they took. Now, this was their handpicked people basically concluding this. So, I wear that as a bit of a badge of pride that they went all out to try and discredit us, and their attempts to do so actually came back and said, no, actually, we think they did okay.
Well, their attempts to do so said 4 days too long out of 127 in Auckland, and that's what they're running with. Oh, lockdown for too long. I learned a long time ago, Chris, that when you get a statement about numbers, you also have to hear the numbers to know, because that statement's true, but to know whether those numbers are sort of credible or not. And I'm sorry, I agree with you that lockdown should have gone a bit shorter, but based on once in 100-year pandemic and doing what was thought was best, I'm not going to put up too much of a fuss over either 4 or 6 days out of 120 that it was gotten wrong. That doesn't seem to be a win for National as much as they're trying to make it a win.
Yeah. And when I look back on that now, some of the portrayal of that, particularly at the end, I remember when we started to remove all of the COVID restrictions, I remember one of the journalists asking Jacinda at a press conference, how does it feel to be giving up all of that power? I was like, well, we never really wanted it in the first place. This isn't what you go into politics to do. You don't go into politics to do these things. And anybody who thinks that we were sitting here enjoying what we were doing is deluded. I didn't sleep for about 2.5 years, and I'm not exaggerating in that. I would be in bed at night staring at the ceiling going, what could go wrong tomorrow? Did we do everything right today? Did we do the best we could? What did we miss today? And how can we fix that up tomorrow? It was, and it never stopped. I remember doing press conferences on Christmas Eve and Boxing Day. We let people have one day off on Christmas Day. It just was 24/7 for 2.5 years. And anyone who thinks that we were enjoying that and having fun and somehow reveling in, the fact that we were having to make all these big decisions just needs to really stop and just take a breath for a minute and think about what they're arguing.
I wonder if there's an element of this, which is that old internationally hot, locally not, because I can remember when Eden Park was full up, like that we went back to rugby and Eden Park was full up and the rest of the world was like, what on earth have these guys done to be able to do that? And then, of course, the grass is always greener, and then you get some complaints. And then it's interesting how much the report talks about misinformation, basically information that was wrong and either purposely disinformation or not purposely being passed on, to which the government had no real control over. I do have a question for you about those people, though, Chris. If you were to win this next election, you will then be the prime minister of a significant chunk of the population who think all sorts of, and I'll use the word crazy, but I don't know what the correct word is, wrong things about what you guys did, what you should have done, what you've hidden from the public, what the real death numbers were. They're not an insignificant number of people. How do you, as one of the people that they point towards and go, how do you be a prime minister for them?
So I don't like lumping people into big, broad categories. And it was one of the things that I sort of struggled with during COVID, is that everybody wanted to lump anyone opposed to vaccination into the anti-vax, crazy, tinfoil hat wearing, camp. Now, I've had the opportunity to speak to quite a few people who were opposed to vaccination, but are otherwise very reasonable people. You could be chatting to them at a party and you wouldn't know that they're, anti-vaccination unless the topic of vaccination comes up. And so you can't just say that everybody who's in that camp is in with the category of people that we saw at the end of the parliamentary protest hurling rocks at the police. That is a small group. Many of those people actually ended up out on the forecourt, not motivated by anti-vax sentiment at all. They were latching on to something that they could be anti-establishment and angry about, and and that was a really tricky dynamic of that movement. Others were genuinely and peaceful protesters who opposed the idea of vaccination. And so I hate that sort of lumping everybody into the same camp, because there were people in the beginning of that protest, there were people out on the forecourt who I knew, who I clearly disagreed with on their issues of vaccination, but they're not bad, evil people. And then there were people who ended up out there hurling rocks at the police who have all sorts of issues, of which vaccination was only one part. So I think we just have, a lot of people have moved on. A lot of people have moved forward. Yes, there is still a very vocal group there, but I don't like to lump everybody into,
But it sounds like what you're saying is they're not a significantly sized group. There's not a large number of people.
They're very vocal, and they'll continue to be vocal. But if you look at the overall levels of support, in fact, the Royal Commission itself found this, there was overwhelming support for the country's COVID-19 response. And many of the people now who just don't want to talk about it still supported what we did. It was deeply difficult. People had really difficult things happen in their lives. I've met people whose marriages broke up during that time, or they lost a loved one during that time. And it was really, really hard. And they don't want to talk about that period because of those things, because they associate that with these other awful things that happened. And I totally understand that.
Hey, at the risk of straying away from the actual inquiry itself, you've kind of prompted a few questions here. Obviously, with the anti-vaxxers, for lack of a better word, how much at the time was being influenced by sort of actors outside of New Zealand, other countries or organisations that you were aware of at that time?
Very hard to prove. We know that in terms of disinformation, there have been some studies about that suggest that New Zealand had one of the highest uptakes of disinformation digitally, around the world. So we've got some data on that. But in terms of things like, money flowing in, it's easy to suspect that there was money flowing into the sort of anti-vax campaigns from overseas, but it's only ever a suspicion, and you could never really prove that.
And I guess the second, somewhat related question, at the time you guys were coming up with how do we respond to this very, very quickly, what's working for us and that sort of thing. How much communication did you have with other leaders and governments as far as their responses? How much were you asking them for advice? How much were they asking us for advice?
Yeah, I had a pretty good relationship with a number of people. I was I was regularly communicating with my health counterpart in Australia, who I got on very well with, and he was in a government that ideologically I was not particularly aligned to, but we were both pretty pragmatic about let's just try and do the best we can with this awful situation we're in. So we talked regularly. I talked to the ministers in Singapore. We were regularly communicating with other sort of like-minded countries around the world to try and coordinate where we could. Vaccination became an issue where vaccine supply, you might recall, was an issue. And we were able to work with Denmark and Spain, who had Labour governments, social democratic governments, where they had a situation where some of their vaccines were going to expire. We had vaccines coming further down the track. We wanted to do a bit of a swap so they could have some of our ones that were still to come. We could get some of their ones, and I remember being up late one night waiting for this shipment of doses that had been picked up in Spain, and I was literally watching it on Flight Tracker in the middle of the night to make sure that it actually arrived, because if it hadn't, our vaccine campaign was going to grind to a halt. There was a lot of that kind of back behind the scenes coordination going on between countries.
Sorry, I just have to highlight this excellent comment just before we moved on from that. No one expected the Spanish vaccination.
Chippy, the question I asked before about people who are sort of in that area of questioning everything, conspiratorial area. What you've said might ring true as well about maybe the numbers aren't quite as big as the loudness of the voices, because I did something this afternoon and I went to Conspiracy FM, otherwise known as Twitter, and I actually put on Twitter, this thing is about 6,000 followers, so it's not massive, and I asked if there was any questions for you, thinking, oh, yep, here we go, this will get us some stuff, and there's very little uptake. It almost is a bit like when you get to stand in front of the bully and actually go, well, say what you want to say, then they haven't said anything. There are a couple here which I'll read you that they don't actually make a lot of sense, funnily enough. Someone wants to know about the role of trading banks during the crisis. Did that have any validity at all?
We've got some issues around bank monopolies in New Zealand and whether we should do more about that. But in terms of their response to the pandemic, I don't really have any criticisms of them. I've got some broader criticisms of banks in general, but yeah, I wouldn't criticize them specifically around their pandemic response.
Another one, like I know the answers to these questions, but I'm just giving you a sense of what's actually come in. Sure, you might want to check if there's anything in the Star that are worth questions as well. Someone wants to know if there were the House's pre-COVID, COVID restrictions and zero restrictions, and there's a graph that shows house prices going up, I guess. Was that intended or not for house prices to go up? That's one of the questions, It's on the other one is what does your government suck so bad? I think we could probably leave that one alone. But so it's interesting that there wasn't. We basically said, here's the guy. What do you want to say? And there's not much of an uptake.
Yeah, you're pretty brave. I've given up on Twitter, or X as it's now called. I just can't quite bring myself to get in amongst the dodginess of Twitter these days. It's pretty soul destroying, and so I generally tend to avoid it.
Well, remember you've got a Blue Sky account.
I did open a Blue Sky account. I just have to confess I'm pretty hopeless at actually updating.
I know you opened it because of us. We had the COO on and she got you to do it. Hey, I do want to ask one question for clarity. Again, I know the answer for this, but I want to hear it from you, because I'm hearing commentators still to this day saying, oh, Jacinda and Chris Hipkins refused to participate in this report. Now, my understanding, tell me if I'm wrong, is you did participate in the report, in the questions, but they wanted you to come and do the questions for a second time in public, and you guys chose not to do that. Is that right?
So I actually was interviewed by the first Royal Commission. I was interviewed that during my time as Prime Minister. The second Royal Commission, I was interviewed by them. They said that they had no further questions for me. They then asked me to come back again, so I went back and I was interviewed by them a second time. The transcripts of both of those interviews have been released in full as part of the Royal Commission's report, so anyone can see what I said. The only thing that we pushed back on was the idea that it should basically be like a court hearing where and I was actually less concerned about myself, more concerned about Jacinda Ardern, because there were some people out there who basically wanted Jacinda Ardern dragged down the street, put into the stocks, and treated like a criminal. And there was no flipping way that I was going to be part of that. And so I said, look, I'm happy to come and talk to you. I'll answer any questions that you have, but I'm not going to participate in some kind of show trial. And so, no other former government ministers participating in a Royal Commission have ever been subjected to that. And I don't see why Jacinda Ardern, who's now perfectly entitled to move on with her life, should have had to put up with that.
So for clarity, you participated in all of the inquiries. So when a commentator says they wouldn't even participate in this inquiry, that's incorrect. You just refused to do it again at a kangaroo court. Correct?
Absolutely correct. And answered all their questions, answered them. I answered them 3 times. I answered them in person, I answered them in writing, and then I answered them in person again.
Didn't you tell us that they ran out of time or something and you left early? Wasn't that something you said last time?
The first interview, I'd set aside an hour and a half, and I think or 2 hours, I think, and I think just after an hour, they said, "Oh, well, we haven't got any more questions." The second time around, it was a little bit longer, but again, they ran out of questions. So,
So you actually you made yourself more available than they needed, is actually the truth.
Yeah, as often as they needed as well. And the other thing is, I mean, they initially submitted dozens of written questions, and I sat there, spent a whole weekend sitting there typing out my answers to their written questions, so that when I met with them in person, they would have had them in advance, so that they could then ask me questions based on them.
I've got one more kind of question to ask you, both on the imitation of BHN that the Herald Now does, which we call Big Herald Now, and also on TV3 tonight. Both of the presenters asked you if you wanted to apologize. And I think there is an apology that you need to offer, so I'm going to give you the opportunity again. I'm wondering if you are willing to apologize to funeral directors for the 19,000 lives that research shows you saved, your not you, but your actions saved through the pandemic, because that would have been really good business for them, those funeral directors. So are you prepared right now to offer an apology to hurting the business of funeral directors from your policies of that government keeping more people alive than not?
When you started that question, I was a little bit worried that you too had somehow developed a National Party editorial board that was going to be dictating what questions you're allowed to ask me. So, look, the funeral directors do a wonderful job, and I don't wish to be in any way critical of them, but I'm very proud of the fact that we kept thousands of people alive. And one of the great frustrations of all of this is, people are like, who are they? Who are these people you kept alive? Well, you could be one of them. You never know who might have otherwise not been here had we not been able to do what we did.
Look, my wife's cousin is an NHS nurse. And when last I spoke with her, we talked about our COVID experiences, mine here in New Zealand and hers working as a nurse in the NHS. She was one of the nurses that just had to deal with their outbreak with no PPE. People were wearing trash bags to do the best that they could. She was in ICU. She caught COVID multiple times, just over and over and over again. That forms a big part of what I've said about a government's number one job, like before the economy, before anything else, is to keep their citizens alive.
I remember
many governments go through without even really having to consider that factor too much. You guys had it arrive in a way, as you said, that hasn't happened since the post-World War One influenza outbreak.
I remember around that February, March period when we were in 2020, when we were first grappling with COVID-19 and figuring out what to do. And I remember watching the TV news and watching them piling bodies on the street in Italy because they had literally run out of space in the morgue. And I remember at the time talking to Jacinda and Grant and others and being like, we have to stop that happening here. You know, whatever it is that we do, that cannot happen here.
Have you told that story before? You told earlier about not sleeping for 2.5 years? Because I've never heard that, and that brings a weight to what was going on.
No, I mean, I haven't really. I do remember. I mean, there's so many sort of little snapshots. Along the way, I've written little bits and pieces, which one day I'll put into a book or something. But I remember on that first day of lockdown, I was driving home from Parliament after we'd made this big decision to, go. We pretty much went straight to level 4, if you'll remember, back in March 2020. And I remember driving home from Parliament and looking around, and it was just like peak hour traffic. And I remember getting home and ringing. I was late at night. I was talking to Jacinda, and I remember saying, "I don't think this is going to work because I've looked around. I've seen people are just living their lives as normal." And then I live up on a hill, and I can look down on State Highway 2 from the hill that I'm in. And I woke up the next morning at 6:30. Now at 6:30, normally there's a snake of traffic, heading into Wellington, and it might have even been earlier than that. And I looked down, and there was not a single car on the road. And I rang her up, and I said, "I think this is going to work." And just the relief, because we were, I remember at the cabinet meeting where I said to Ashley Bloomfield, because if you remember, it was all about suppression in the beginning, flattening the curve. Elimination happened further down the track. But I remember saying to him, for this to work, what kind of level of cooperation from people do we need? And he said, we need about 80% of New Zealanders to follow the rules that we're setting out for this to work in terms of flattening the curve. And of course, we got 99% of New Zealanders complying with those early restrictions.
And
as a result, we did something we never thought was going to be possible.
Yeah.
What was that?
When does 80% of New Zealand ever agree on something?
Yeah.
Just doesn't happen.
Elimination wasn't the original goal because we didn't think that would originally be possible. But actually, Kiwis made that happen. And there was not a police officer on every street corner to tell you to go back into your house if you came outside. It happened because people believed in what we were doing and actually were willing to make that sacrifice personally. So I think New Zealanders all, as much as there was a minister at the time and I'll get questioned on what went well and what didn't and all that kind of stuff. I think New Zealanders should collectively be proud of the fact that we as a country achieved that. It wasn't just the government, it was everybody doing what we asked them to do that actually achieved what we did and saving the thousands of lives that we were able to save.
Yeah. Chewy, is there any questions here? I've got a couple of other questions for you, Chippy, not about the COVID stuff, if that's okay. Have you got any other questions about the COVID in the chat or in the stars or anything that you want to throw out there?
I'm just going to go through some of the highlighted comments appropriate to what we've been discussing. Pete here has his story here. My dad had to go to hospital for an unrelated issue during the pandemic. He for sure wouldn't have been able to had our hospitals been overwhelmed. JC and the Pidgeot cats with an existing autoimmune condition. I should have kept up with boosters, but I got slack, nasty COVID, blood clot on lungs, years of suffering. Makes me so angry to hear people downplay it. Cookers can go and get cooked. Ian says, I'd stay at home for years to have someone who has died back again. People need to look ahead.
Yeah.
Wow. As an immunocompromised, let me say, I'm so grateful for your science-backed approach to the pandemic. Businesses can recover and the disenfranchised can go and find a new perspective. It's a very polite way of saying that. As an Aussie stuck in Melbourne, Victoria, I was jealous of Kiwis. This COVID report is a nothing burger. Let's get back to discussing when will Luxon get rolled. There are people now saying that conspiracy theorists were proven right despite evidence proving the exact opposite. It worries me where people get their info. And look, with the current government, I think that the whole thing here, I see a current government that is so afraid of their internal polling and the horror week that Luxon has just had, that they are trying to manufacture outrage and speak to a frankly disenfranchised, that's just all blown out, we can't see it, disenfranchised part of our population that we know is small, but they think it's worth courting them because it's that bad. Yeah. Royal Commission finds, you read it out, Pat.
This is the National Party right now. Royal Commission finds Hipkins kept Auckland locked down longer than advised and misled Kiwis.
Yeah.
So good on you.
It's looking pretty desperate. I mean, they're desperate to change the topic this week. You know,
Yeah.
Luxon's days are numbered. They've trashed the economy. They have trashed the economy. You know, everything that they promised that they were going to do, they were going to. Remember, Nicola Willis said it was going to get cheaper to go to the supermarket. Well, how's that worked out? They said that they were going to get people off benefits into work. How's that worked out? You know,
it's really
everything that they said they were going to do has gone wrong.
I'm having quite a bit of footage from 3 years ago popping up in my feeds at the moment. And it's really interesting to be able to go, like, I'd love to go back over the debates that you guys were having and see what was promised and what wasn't promised. It's really interesting. Well, look, in saying that as well, I do want to ask you about leadership. What's the inside word?
I think
because there was a very good point made. We still with Chippy? You still with us? 1, 2, 3. Can you still hear us, Chippy?
Yes.
It's not just. Is it just me, Chewy?
I can hear you, Chris. Can you hear Pat?
No, I can't.
1, 2, 3. Can you hear me, Chewy?
Oh, we've lost him. We've lost him. I've done something and cooked it. Oh no.
AirPods. So can you hear me, Chewy?
So can you hear me? I can hear you, Pat. Chris, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Chewy, but I can't hear Pat. I don't know what happened there. He just
Pat,
suddenly disappeared.
I'm gonna jump out and come back in. I'll be 15 seconds. Goodbye.
See, we're still struggling with COVID today. I'm sure Pat told you that the reason that he's in his living room with a bodged together studio setup is because COVID's in his house right now.
Yeah, indeed.
I'm sure Pat's going to sort of come back and ask you some form of this question. Oh, maybe he's coming back now.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Can you hear Pat now?
1, 2, 3. 3.
No, I can't. Sorry.
No, he can't hear you. Sorry, Pat.
You've grabbed the thing or something, Chewy. Well, you might as well wrap up, bro. I'll just sit.
Well, what is your question, Pat? And I will relay it as best I can.
Just any inside word on the leadership thing. Because the journalists are saying their leaks are telling them it's all over for Luxon. What is he hearing around Parliament?
Yeah. So the question that Pat has for you is, what's your inside word on how things are going over at National? Obviously a horror week. Everybody's doing some butt covering. What have you guys heard?
Look, not much, to be honest. I mean, I think the fact that they were so desperately trying to change the topic to anything else this week just, shows that they're in a world of pain. The reality is whoever ends up being leader of the National Party is going to have to answer for the mess that they've made of things. They said they were going to grow the economy. They shrunk it. They said they were going to get people back to work. More people have lost their jobs. They said they were going to be pro-business. Businesses are going into liquidation right, left and centre. They said that they were going to, fix infrastructure. They're spending less money fixing up infrastructure now than we were as a country before the election. You could catalogue the areas where they said they were going to fix things and have made them worse. I mean, the cost of living, they said they were going to fix the cost of living. Things have gotten more expensive. Remember, families with kids were promised $250 a fortnight under Christopher Luxon. Not one single family, let me repeat this, not one single family has received the $250 a fortnight that they promised. And whoever ends up winning the musical game of musical chairs or whatever that they're going through at the moment to figure out who's going to be their next leader, they're going to have to answer for those things.
Well, on behalf of everyone here at BHN, all I can say is don't let them off the ropes. It feels like they're on the ropes now and staggered. So go for the knockout. Go hard. You were
Well,
great in the house today. There's been lots of comments about that before we went live. So we're
Thank you.
enjoying you on the offense.
yeah. Well, to be honest, again, reflecting on the COVID period, uh, while they were busy politicking and fighting with each other, we were actually trying to run a pandemic response without being overly political about it. And I'll confess to you, when I took over from Jacinda and hit the campaign trail, it took a wee while for me to get back into being a politician again. And I'll confess, my first attempt at campaigning as leader of the Labour Party wasn't as successful as I would have liked. We lost. But this time around, I'm looking forward to the campaign.
Cool. Good.
Am I still unable to be heard by Chris? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You wrap up, Chewie.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time, Chris. It's been great having you here. We love having you on. And may this continue on to next year when you're Prime Minister.
Great, guys. Good to talk to you. And I'm sure we'll speak again as the election campaign unfolds. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Look forward to it.
Thanks,
Have a good evening.
All the best. Can you hear me, Chewie?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Pat. So I think when I put up that window, it somehow killed your audio to Chris.
I didn't even get to ask the best question. Mind you, hey, listen, Chris. Oh, Chris has just gone. I was going to say, if he waited there, he probably would have heard me. You know what the best question was going to be? This was the best question. So this is Nicola Willis today. We're going to play this whole lot. I wanted to play this for Chippy. I was going to say this, right? Nicola Willis is talking about why a reduction in fuel excise shouldn't happen. This is what she says. Hopefully you can all hear this.
On the other hand, we need to be straight with people that there's no free lunch, that any reduction in fuel excise equals a hole somewhere else in the budget.
So any reduction in fuel excise equals a hole somewhere else in the budget. I was wondering if she asked that about like reimbursements to landlords and tax breaks to tobacco companies, because I'm assuming that they also create a hole in the budget that has to be replaced by something else.
Is this a suggestion that she may have learned something?
Maybe.
Or is this accidental?
Is it hypocrisy? Hey, anything else in the chat that we want to get to? Because we will continue on as quickly as we can.
Well,
did over 1,000. We had, just for people who are watching us, so you know, the little community got. We got over 1,000 lives during that. Creeped up over 1,000, which is nice.
Nice. Some of them were crunchies, but we welcome their engagement. Citizen Gold with the traditional 202 days to register to vote. Unless Winnie triggers a snap election, don't wait. Ditch the pricks. 26.
Gold's got his merchandise too. Saw it on Saturday for the meetup.
Nice. So many flavors to be, and the crunchies choose salty.
What flavor would you be, Chewie? If you had to pick yourself to be a chip flavor, what would it be?
A chip flavor or just flavor?
This is
goody gum.
This is like a 6. I've just done like 6 hours of talkback.
The bubblegum and lollies.
Chips?
No, ice cream.
Okay. Like goody gumdrop.
If it's chips, what are they? The Heartland chips that are maple bacon.
Because you do actually look like a Mountie right now with that beanie on. So you could get the look as well. I think I'd be salt and vinegar.
This would have been a great question. I'm sorry we didn't get to it while we had Chris. Is Labor going to acknowledge the ongoing effects of repeated COVID infections and long COVID in line with recent evidence? That is such a hard thing. I don't think anybody really is. I think it's just going to be one of those medical things that just bobbles away. It's not going to. No government's going to respond to that. Unfortunately, they because they're politicians, because they're governments, they will just want to move it away, and it's just a medical thing.
I'm just in the kitchen getting a drink. I'll be back in a second.
Yeah. I think that's just the harsh truth of that. And look, I want to cast people, those of you that have been ride or die BHN fans for a long time, remember in the early days of COVID when we had that doctor come on that was doing a lot of the research into COVID? I forget her name. Do you remember, Pat?
Oh, yes.
Because she gave us great information into what all around the virus, what the research was looking at, and what they thought was happening. And I remember her mentioning long COVID and the flow-on effects from repeated.
That's what
COVID
she was studying.
Infections.
That's what she was studying.
Yeah, that was her wheelhouse. So this is one of the things that I speak for Pat here, is really proud of, is the quality of guests that we've been able to get on for some very specialized things at a time where, as we were talking about today with Chris, the amount of misinformation was going around. We have always been trying to get the best actual proper information to you.
I'm so angry that I can't remember her name. We talked to her 20 times.
Yeah, it was really, really good.
I'm scrolling through all Anna Brooks.
Anna Brooks, Dr. Anna Brooks, that's the one.
Yep.
Lytton 2133, to compare the numbers, there are 257 people that died on Erebus, and almost everyone in the country knew someone that had died. Imagine the impact for 19,000 people.
Yeah. Sheesh.
Like, again, I have to come back to my UK experience. If friends and family, like I've got a long time friend who was in the UK for their outbreak. He got COVID. He got organ damage. He's lost big chunks of his memory. Talking to him last time I was over about what it was like for him, lost his job, lost his flat, lost his health, is harrowing. And the only thing that I could say to match that is I got a holiday for the first time in ages, and it was nice not hearing traffic all the time. Like it's like being on a different planet when you talk to someone that was in the UK.
Yeah, and we still remember it was Italy and it was New York, wasn't it? We still remember seeing. I mean, it's so funny how what this still does to you. I think I've told this story before. I probably had an intermediate school age child doing a school show, they do skits and stuff, and it must have been either the end of 2020 or the end of 2021, and it was 3 PM. They were using the Otago University Theatre, and I went along, and it was a play about jumping to the future and coming back, and jumping to the future and coming back, and talking about the decisions made today, jumping into the future. And one of the scenes they did was a little kid playing Jacinda, and they played that noise, that klaxons noise.
Oh yeah.
And I actually, I may have had a panic attack like once in my life, but like in that moment, this foreboding fear, like just hearing that at my kids play, it was really strange. But you can see how the time has been impacting people. Like, and I'm pretty I wouldn't say I'm 10 foot tall and bulletproof, but I handle most things fairly well. And it was something there was something deep down in me that was still suffering or struggling from that time in a mental health sort of way, for sure.
One of the things that Chris mentioned in passing was the phrase "flatten the curve." Now, I remember, I think it was Toby Morris cartoon about what that meant, what flattening the curve meant for our healthcare system and that sort of thing. Now, Toby did another one. He did another graph a little bit later on, which was what the public's response to our COVID response was going to be. And it was kind of this map of so we react early and nothing happens, and then afterwards we're going to have people going, well, nothing happened, so we shouldn't have had to do it anyway. And this is where we're at now. This is where we're at. It was predicted. Because we weren't stacking people like fucking firewood in refrigerated trailers like some countries were, people think we overreacted.
It still frustrates me.
They did it any other way, and your nan dies or whatever, then you blame the government for killing your nan.
Isn't that ironic that if the government of the day, whoever they were, had to pick whether they were going to get blamed for killing your nan or blamed for Auckland being opened up 6 days too late, they chose the 6 days too late and kept your nan alive, but you're angry with them. it frustrates me. Like, to be honest with you, it's like my wife and I we're separated in the house at the moment because she's got COVID, and part of me is kind of like, is it really, is it such a, and she's really clear. She's like, because she's actually got quite a mild case of it as well. And she's like, but the thing that's different with COVID from like a cold or the flu is it hits everybody differently. Like if you get a strain of flu, you pretty much all have the same symptoms. But because COVID hits everybody differently, yeah, most people are going to be fine, of course. But because it hits everybody differently, one person with a strain that's mild to them might be really serious for another person. So probably even more so than me. We talked about it this afternoon, and now she's like, well, we've been doing this for 4 days. If I come upstairs too soon and you get it, I'll be really pissed that we've wasted these 4 days. So we'll see it out. I'm like, okay, I don't disagree. It's like, so it's sensible. I know it's the right thing to do and it's sensible, but I also know there'll be lots of people out there that hear me say this, be like, it's fucking cold, you pussy. Oh, you're worried about it's just a cold, you lefty. Go put your mask on. I was like, well, I guess my wife loves me and she's taking care of me. Crazy as that may seem.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's just such a strange period of time. And look, talking about Nationals, the way that Nationals trying to position this, I was talking to you about this a little bit earlier today. I don't expect much from National. I really don't. Yeah. But this has disappointed me because it seems such a blatant lie. We know that people aren't going to go and read big chunks of that report, that they are going to rely on what the party that they choose to support has told them. We are relying on the mass media to do a good job of cutting through this. And I don't have a lot of faith there based on past experiences, because they'll go with a headline that gets the engagement. And maybe that engagement is the government at the time did a bad job. Maybe that's going to get the engagement. And here we are in an election year, and I expect more from every political party to play a straight bat for the good of the country. And maybe that's just me being naive as hell. But I also expect our news media to bring their fucking A game.
Yeah, there's something going on with the news media. Like we've been talking about TVNZ not featuring the biggest political news story of the day last Friday, but mentioning it on Monday. And like the headlines on stuff at the moment, I do look at them sometimes and go, the headlines, it is starting to feel on some news sites, maybe I'm being a bit naive thinking it hasn't always been the way, that they are being very clickbaity because they're desperate to have people click on so they can desperately get that click through for a payment from Google. But yeah, I don't know. Any more chats?
Oh yes. Who remembers the phrase dick nosing? I remember it from just now, and I will use it a lot. Yeah. Nicola Willis calling people impatient for wanting a quick turnaround is absurd for a party that campaigned on a quick turnaround.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
It's in the ballot. It says I got bumped for an interview with HeraldNow at 8:15 a.m. for Nicola Willis. What would have been better, Nikki No Boats or the $700 payment and $7.50 latte? Wow.
The other thing I didn't get a chance to mention to Chippy then, because someone got me bumped, was when he talked about the $250 and no one's got it. Interesting fact, that policy was released on August 30th. August 30th. And this government is going around going, they're not releasing any policies. Where are their policies? Nationals feature policy, right? Their biggest policy was released on August 30th. That's about 5 weeks before last election. So I would have liked to have said that.
But Labor aren't doing victory laps with their entire election campaign now, and that's dishonest. Is someone not being fair?
Yeah, I think so. Should we move on? Should we go on to Nikki No Boats? I think it's been talked about.
Yes, two super chats and then we're good. My mum cared for my nan during COVID. Nan died in 2024 from old age and dementia. Mum died in 2025. Neither ever had COVID. Thank you, Chippy. My wife got so shitty because I said no to our joint 50th birthday. I still have no regrets. Yeah, she's over it now too. And to dick nose was to wear your mask with your nose sticking out the top. Nothing made me more furious at the time as someone working in retail. I literally have a folder on my phone of almost exclusively older men dick nosing through the shop.
And you remember the research showed that actually breathing through your nose made you more susceptible to COVID because of the mucus in your nose. So in other words, they were wearing a mask here. What did South Park call it? The chin diaper here, and they were making it more likely they would catch COVID by doing that, which was ridiculous. The other thing I was going to say, it's in the ballot. I hope you've got some VHN gear. And then when you go on Big Herald Now, you're wearing it. I'm just saying, just putting it out there. Obviously, if you've got some it's in the ballot gear, you should wear that. But if you don't, VHN gear, we'll get it on there. All right, we good?
Yep.
Okay. Nicola Willis was on Big Herald News this morning, and she was talking about all sorts of stuff. I've skipped quite a bit forward here to 3 minutes 55 because there is multiple repetitions of the question. So Ryan Bridge is asking her, at what price, what dollar per litre, do you start to consider removing some of the excise tax? And she doesn't answer it. And then they talk about the G7 releasing their reserves. And then he says, have you asked the G7 to release their reserves? And then again, he says, what price is too much for Kiwi families? That's the second time. And then we come to the third time, he's basically asking the same question. So I just thought we'd get rid of that first 4 minutes and start talking and showing you from the point where they start talking about what Labor did and when they started removing it. And she does give an answer. And the answer is, I'm not going to give you an answer, which actually is fair. It's an answer. But it took him 3 attempts to get anything out of her. And this is the third attempt.
Remember, though, when it was, from memory, about $3 a litre, when Jacinda cut by 25 cents, people were saying, we literally can't drive to work. I remember a forestry worker in Northern, I literally can't get to work. If people can't go to their jobs, if they don't have petrol to get to work, the economy starts to be affected in that way. So it's not a completely stupid idea. What price is too much for your average Kiwi family to afford?
Well, we are very conscious of that, and that is why, as a government, when we came in, we froze intended petrol tax increases. We said this is not the time to be continuing to increase prices, even though they'd fallen behind inflation, because we recognised the impact that has on Kiwis, and we will continue to judge that very carefully. I'm not going to give you a number today. I'm conscious that we're still experiencing significant volatility, and we will be monitoring it, because on the one hand, of course, we will be very mindful of the impact high petrol prices will have on people. On the other hand, we need to be straight with people that there's no free lunch, that any reduction in fuel excise equals a hole somewhere else in the budget. And New Zealanders understand that this is not a time to be pumping up borrowing. And we do continue to need to maintain our roads and rebuild them after big weather events. We need to make sure we have the funds put aside to achieve that.
So that was obviously the longer part of the clip that I played earlier. So I'll say it again. As a part of that answer, Nicola Willis said any reduction in fuel excise equals a hole somewhere else in the budget. And I do just wonder, Chewy, if she's ever been asked about the hole that reimbursements the landlords left and how that was going to be plugged. I do wonder if she's ever been asked about the hole that was the tax breaks and how she's going to plug that. I'm wondering if she's been asked about the hole that was Big Tobacco getting $1 billion over 4 years for their soggy wet cigarettes and how they're going to plug that hole. It's pretty interesting that when it comes to something that would genuinely help, and she talks about when National did it, right? And I heard this today, maybe on 3 News. When National did it, it cost us $1 billion. What I heard on, I think it was 3 News tonight, saying the cost of petrol could cost families an additional $1 billion. So it's still going to cost someone $1 billion, And I guess the difference between these guys and maybe the last guys is these guys are saying, we'll put that cost onto the consumer immediately. And the last guy said, we'll take that hit and get it back because we can manage $1 billion more than you guys can. So yeah, there you go. This clip number one.
Just a disaster. Yeah, I mean, again, it plays into the fact that they can't take a defensible position because of other choices they've made. Like, why is this different from the other tax break you gave out to your supporters?
Yeah, that's a hole. There's a hole now in your revenue. How are you going to plug that?
And you have recently said, hey, look, one of the problems that we have for doing what we want to do is for some reason we have a lower tax revenue coming in. And look, we don't know how that's happened. You know, we've laid off thousands of people. Thousands of people have left the country. We gave away millions and millions and millions of dollars to landlords and tobacco companies. But we can't work out why our tax revenue's gone down. I guess it's a mystery. Maybe researchers from another era further down the line can work this out, but we just don't have the technology and the ability it now. Yes, Pat is doing her dirty tonight, and I realise what that sounds like, and I withdraw and apologise.
I just thought, and honestly, I don't set them up. It is just what it is. This is where it's paused. This is unbelievable, Chewy. This is Nicola Willis not answering a very straight question. So Chippy just gave us all that information in that interview, yeah? So basically, he was on earlier with Ryan Bridge, and they talked about their jet to GDP ratio, and Ryan Bridge was quite flippant and said something like, well, it was going to be worse under you. And he's like, and Chippy's like, no, that's not true. That's incorrect. And Ryan's like, well, I'm happy to be proven wrong. And so what he's now doing is he's going to ask Nicola Willis about Chippy's claim that the jet debt to GDP ratio is higher under them than was being projected by Treasury under Labor. And so that's a straight up question. Is that true or not, right? Like, can you answer that? And you just listen to the tap dancing, man. It's unfathomable.
Finally, I had Chris Hipkins on the show earlier, and we were talking about debt to GDP ratio. He said that your current debt to GDP ratio is higher than that ratio was forecast to be under Labor. Is he right?
Yes, no.
Well, what is the case is that we inherited not only a huge debt mountain from the last government, with debt more than having doubled as a proportion of the economy, but also the interest bill on that debt. So in our budgets, we need to make room for more than $9 billion a year to service that debt. And so we've taken a prudent course of saying we need to get that debt curve bending down. That requires making savings now. We've made $43 billion worth of savings so far. Chris Hipkins, at every juncture, when we've put those savings forward, has opposed them. So
but just
it would be higher.
But is he right?
And I don't think
hang on.
It's cute for him to claim otherwise, because he still hasn't told us where he'd find the $12.8 billion.
Yes, I know. There's issues going forward.
But is he right?
Scheme.
There's issues going forward, but I
compare apples with apples, Ryan, and so I won't have him comparing things to an alternative reality that simply doesn't exist, because Labor have been clear and consistent.
All right.
Spending more, the debt would be higher, the borrowing would be higher.
And that's the end of it, Julie. You almost have to give her a clap for it. 90 seconds of straight not answering the question, even when, Ryan did a very poor job. He tried to come back at the end. But yeah, this could be this thing where mainstream media have a come on, we're only got it for 9 minutes, get a move on. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, look, like he's no Jack Tame, that's for sure. Oh God, you know what? I wish the media would do a job here a bit. Like, this is a consistent message from our government about why we shouldn't change government, is because Labor borrowed so much money. That's how inflation happened, and that's what Labor always do. They borrow money and then they spend money, and then by implication, that's not what National does.
Mm.
How much money did John Key borrow during the global financial crisis? I'll give you a wee hint. It's more than what Labor borrowed during COVID.
Yeah, but you can say that now. They're borrowing more now compared to what
exactly.
Labor did.
But
go
this
back to
is the
John
thing,
Key.
is that you just get National going, tax and spend, Labor government. Well, guess what? Every government taxes so they can spend. It's a nonsense phrase that fucks me off no end.
Mm.
And this implication that like it's ordained from on high that Labor are bad for the economy and they spend too much and they tax you to do it, whereas National are good at the economy. And it's just taken as a given by our media. And I just wish whatever statement, whatever party is making, that our news media, our newspapers, our political commentators don't just run with that message. That the first question should be, Nicola Willis, you say that Labor is bad because they borrowed this much money, and that's bad. But your government has borrowed this much money, and the well-regarded government of John Key borrowed more still. So who's bad? Give us some context on this.
Yeah, and what are you borrowing for?
Why are you saying it? Like, if you're borrowing, like, again, I hate this analogy of boiling a country's budget down to like a household budget, but if you borrow money to get a new roof because your roof is leaking, or a solar setup because the world is fucking bananas right now, and that just seems like a solid idea. If you're borrowing money and having to service that debt because it means that all of your stuff stays dry or your power bills go down, that's good. If you borrow the same amount of money so you can go and buy lollies at the supermarket, that's not good use of debt. So what's the difference? Well, Labor possibly borrowed a whole lot of money to keep people in their houses, in their jobs and alive, and you're borrowing money to build a hugely expensive partial road in Northland and to give your mates a handout.
Yeah, and they're borrowing for tax cuts. They've given tax cuts away, so they're borrowing to cover
for tax cuts.
Yeah.
So who's the bad guy, Nicola?
Yeah.
Is it
100%.
you? Are you the baddie?
Let's give them a little chuckle at the end. I've already showed you this, Chewy, but the interview at the end was particularly strange, where he said goodbye to her and then realized he had another question, and he brought her back, and she just kind of popped up, and they continued the conversation. Enjoy this.
Prepare to die of second-hand embarrassment.
I didn't even ask her about Luxon.
Didn't ask her about Luxon.
Interested in that? Yeah. There, he's still there, isn't he? Right, 8:15. All right. Did you have anything to say about your boss? People kind of
don't care at the answer. I just enjoyed the going away and coming back.
All right, just everything. It's like, we didn't ask him about Luxon. He's still there. And then the producer hits the button. Oh fuck, you're back again. Shit.
I can't read that name. Shamugi. I need to put my reading glasses on. You know, I've got reading glasses as well. I'll put those on because I've got my little screen. There we go. I can see. Aotearoa COVID Action is campaigning to get clean air in schools, an evidence-based solution to the spread of COVID in the wider population. Yeah, I mean, like, forget COVID almost, like just for coughs and colds and that kind of stuff. I reckon that's an excellent idea. All schools should be told, they need some kind of clear air filtration. That would be a great idea. The GEL 492, JAL. Polio, it's just a government lie to put 5G chips in your arms and for Bill Gates to remotely turn off your credit. Yeah, okay, boomer. Matters. AKA the cat. Chewy. Your naivete is charming. Imagine still having the ability to be disappointed. Bless.
Fucking reported for bullying, man. That's so mean.
Oh, well, I got bullied about my hat last night, so I made sure I made a proper presentation. Why are we looking at Ryan No Brain talking to Nikki No Finance Degree? This really looks like a no brains involved moment. Yes. What do they say? If they had a brain, it would be lonely. If they had a brain between them, it would be lonely. Is that the same?
You know, look, talking about just the great minds that are going to be contesting this election, I am so excited to see Barbara Edmonds versus Nicola Willis.
Did you hear Shane Retty's pulled out? Shane Retty's retiring. We're all chomping at the bits to see Dr. Gary Payenda up against Shane Retty, and Retty's retiring. So
I'm just calling it now. Dr. Gary forced Shane Retty to retire. He saw the writing on the wall.
Maybe
he was looking at contesting an election that he was going to lose because he was going up against a heavily BHN backed candidate, and he had the choice of that very hard fight that he was definitely going to lose, and then on the other hand, looking at the nest that he has feathered for himself by gutting our health department while he is heavily invested in private medical care. He made his choice.
I mean, it's probably quite a good time to roll straight into our last story for the night, which is Mariameno Kapa-Kingi and the courts finding it unlawful that she was booted from Te Pati Maori. What does that mean? I don't really know, actually. Could you imagine Mariameno actually wanting to run for Te Pati Maori? Is she doing this just as like a flex? Like, I will leave when I'm good and damn well ready. You guys can't kick me out. Or is she going to run on the ticket? I mean, Taku Teferis has said, nah, I'm out, and he's going to run as an independent. But, yeah, Mariameno has fought to get back in. And now the question is, why? Is she making a point? Or does she want to run and be a part of TPM? Let's have a look at the story from One News tonight.
The truth has risen. Those are the words of expelled Te Pati Maori MP Mariameno Kapa-Kingi after the High Court ruled she permanently be reinstated. She'd been accused of bringing the party into disrepute, but in a scathing judgment, the party's been found to have breached its policies and the tikanga that underpin them. Political editor Mikey Sherman reports.
It was a political breakdown on a scale rarely seen.
What's your response to allegations of a dictatorship model at the leadership?
Thank you. If I can thank Mikey for that one. Kia ora.
The fracturing of Te Pati Maori creating serious accusations and scandal, debated not only in the court of public opinion, but also the High Court.
It is red rag to a bull to certain media and political opponents.
Today, Justice Radich ruled the example.
Wonder who those political opponents would be, Chewy. Wonder who they'd be. Ones that this is red rag. I wonder who they'd be.
It's just a mystery. Well, it's unknowable.
It's a mystery.
Old MP Mariameno Kapa-Kingi is to be reinstated.
Hey, look, we respect the court's decision, and we will uphold the decisions made by the court, and we look forward to repatriating Mariameno back into the party.
When the party suspended the MP, the court heard she wasn't invited to the meeting or told suspension was on the table. With no ability to respond and her electorate absent, the judge ruled the suspension was unlawful in the pure sense of that word. Then came the expulsion.
The breaches are about the standards that we expect from our members.
In court, Te Pati Maori pointed to this One News interview.
It's time for change is what I see, Mikey.
Suggesting it brought the party into disrepute, but the judge found proper process for expulsion under the Constitution, or kawa, was not followed, declaring the party has not just breached the kawa's rules, but the very essence of the tikanga principles that...
So Te Pati Maori has breached its own rules and guidelines to remove Kapa-Kingi, which is interesting. So the High Court has basically said, you guys have set these rules, and we're making the decision that you haven't abided by the rules you're put in place, and so it's unlawful. This is fascinating, and to hear Rawari say repatriation to bring back in, you know, I wonder if this is going to be a makeup, and maybe at the end of this, Chewy, we'll get to the end of this. It'll be interesting to hear. Do you think if Mariameno stays within Te Pati Maori overall, will that make for a stronger parliament or a stronger party, I should say, or is the right just going to use this as a as a wedge to go. They can't even get their stuff together. Don't let those Te Pati Maori guys come in together. They're still a mess. I don't know, to be able to put the swords down, so to speak, and move forward. Is that a better outcome than actually a clean break? We'll talk about that maybe towards the end. Let's just get to the end of this.
Yep.
Expressly underpin the rules.
We acknowledge that the court's given some guidance, and I think it's really important to take that rule of law and to be able to take that guidance for what it is.
Giving guidance is one thing, but do you acknowledge that you didn't get it right?
I think the court's made it really clear where we stood, so I don't know if anyone else got some other questions.
At its AGM in December, the party's position was clear.
Is there a future whereby Mariameno and Tākuta could be back in the party permanently?
Well, that's an issue of trust, and it's being so badly broken that that's a very difficult issue.
Now the court has spoken.
Te Taitonga and Tākuta Ferris may feel as though he has a right also to be reinstated. Will you look at that?
Tākuta has made it quite clear that he'd be running as an independent heading into this next election, and I wish him all the luck in regards.
The party's rift not fully repaired, with the question now how they'll all get along.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, real interesting actually. Are they stronger? Are they stronger together? Are they stronger with it actually at all mending the fences and getting on with it, or is it unbelievable that can even happen after this much hurt? What are your thoughts, Joey?
I think John Tamahiri's comments there are correct, just not in the way that he thinks they are. Like, he's talking about they need to earn back my trust. No, I think it's the other way around.
You reckon?
Like, I think Rawiri, he's been quite clear where he sits on this. And I think now that this is out of the way, I mean, we won't see what's going on behind closed doors and that sort of thing. But if they can patch this and get back on mission, then there's nothing that can hurt them.
So flip it. Flip it. Say that this is someone from ACT, sort of the opposite side, who has done the same thing. Do we look over to them and go, oh, yep, that's the good decision for them? Or will we be forever now going to use that they can't even get their shit together to expel someone?
It's a good point. It's an excellent point and an excellent way of framing it. I think the answer to that is, hey, look, we had some shit to work out, and it has been worked out in its fullness. It was dirty, and it was unpleasant, and it has hurt us, and now it is behind us, is the way to play this.
I also do wonder if maybe the answer to my own question is, who gives a shit? You're not voting for us anyway. We're not voting for ACT anyway, so who cares if we talk shit about it? Who cares if ACT talks shit about Te Pati Maori? That's not their base.
The people that they need to convince are the people that are considering whether they vote for Te Pati Maori or someone else, whether they're on the general role or the Māori role, right? And I don't think anybody is going to say that this whole thing hasn't hurt their support. But I think the mettle of Te Pati Maori is going to be tested in the next couple of months based on how they campaign, how they move on from this point, and how they reflect on the support that they gain or lose going into the election. Like, I mean, all of the polls, they've taken a little bit of a hit, but to be honest, it hasn't destroyed their support in the polls.
Oh, well, I do wonder about that once you're polling within margin of error anyway, because we've certainly heard from people, like very, very clearly from some people who have been very, very hurt by this. So don't disagree with what you're saying, but don't know if the polls are reflective of the feeling as opposed to the stories we're hearing. Don't know.
I think Rawiri, especially in his comments and how he put himself forward, him specifically, how he put himself forward at Waitangi, I think there is some bridge building going on, and I don't think it's going to bring Ferris back. I think he's made his decision. He's very clearly a guy that can make up his own mind, and he's going, no, I'm just going to be shot at this. I'm going to run as an independent. Fine. But even the comment of like, he's made his decision, I wish him all the luck. That was the right statement to make. I think Rawiri is playing a straight bat, and I think he is doing a really good job in the face of knowing that JT could come in over the top of him and just fucking set fire to everything, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I know for a long time you've talked about JT and your thoughts. Okay, put it this way. Do you think Te Pati Maori can move forward with the current crew they've got, or does someone need to bow out? Whether it is Mariameno, whether it is JT, does JT need to bow out to be able to make this party function properly moving forward? Is he the right guy for the job? We know that when we had Debbie on recently, was it when we had her on? Maybe it was. I heard her say at least that she didn't like JT when she first met him, but he was the right person for the job. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see what happens.
Tell me, out of all the other parties in Parliament, how often do you hear from the party president?
Yeah, never. Unless he's in court on child abuse. I think that's about the only time.
Yeah,
Oh, Chewy's gone. I didn't do that. Oh, Chewy's back. Wait for him to say wrong button or something like that.
That wrong button. Yeah. Like you don't hear from party presidents ever, but we hear from JT all the fucking time.
Yeah.
And it's like, do you want to be the party president or do you want to be a politician? Make up your fucking mind. But at the moment, you're coming in and out of the door, and every time you come in, you make it hard for the guys that are the public face of your party. And I think you have actively made this situation worse at every turn.
So you know what it is, yeah? It's like the party president should only be really clear or obvious in the public eye if he adds a lot to the narrative. In other words, I don't know. Let's say Richie McCaw was the party president of some party, then they'd put him in front of the media all the time because the public are so enamored with him, it might bring the party some kind of credibility. Richie McCaw was a rugby player, too. He used to play a sports ball game. You may not know that.
Thank you. That's some good context.
But what does JT offer when it comes to how the public think of Te Pati Maori? If it's more downside than upside, then yeah, he should stay in the back room. If it's more upside than downside, then he can be a tool used to help Te Pati Maori move forward. And I guess what you've always said is you think it's more downside than upside.
Yeah, like I want some acknowledgement about his part in reinvigorating, the Māori Party into Te Pati Maori. He is a key aspect of that. They were pretty raggedy after their coalition agreement with National. They lost a lot of support. And then this reinvention, by all accounts, JT was a big part of that.
Yeah.
But I think with him having been an MP, from being someone that is asked for comment, that isn't in front of the camera, that adjustment to being a more behind-the-scenes player and just taking some satisfaction in the job that you've done, maybe away from the public recognition, I don't think he can make that adjustment. And I think that's a negative for the party as a whole.
Is he a Noah's Ark? So I know you don't have to understand the story or believe the story, but the story of Noah's Ark was used for a period of time for one job. And then what happened to Noah's Ark after everyone marched off it? No one knows, no one cares, because it did its job. Is what he did by dragging Te Pati Maori forward, is that the job he was there to do, and now he needs to go elsewhere? You know what I mean? Like, so is his job done? And I don't know that, and I'm not even suggesting it is, but that's obviously one of the questions that needs to be sort of answered.
Because I personally think that Rawiri and Debbie are excellent politicians. I think they're great communicators. I think they have managed to put their views forward in a way that has advanced their cause in front of people that might have been quite hostile to them. They're still not everybody's cup of tea, but no one's asking them to be. They're asking them to be a representative.
But actors, Yeah, but ACT is not everybody's cup of tea, and no one complains about them. You know what I mean? It's like there is a
that's our whole rationale.
You know what I mean? It's like every negative you can say about Te Pati Maori from the other side, you can also lob at the other side. Like you can say all the same that there's a constituency for ACT which is very narrow and very well, hopefully getting shallower and shallower. There's a constituency for Te Pati Maori that is narrow. You know, it's like it's just different. It's got that element of quote unquote race card to it, which people seem to jump up and down about, but it's a constituency. There's nothing wrong with having that constituency. If you wanted to have a constituency for people who are over 6 foot, you could start that party and you could make policies for people over 6 foot. You probably wouldn't get many votes, but you could do that. It would be okay. You're allowed to. Doesn't matter what your constituency is. You can make a party to represent any constituency that you want. I nearly said something really bad about when your constituency is child abusers. You can even make, and there is already a party, but I'm not going to say that because I don't want a lawyer's letter. I don't want a lawyer's letter. I don't want a lawyer's letter.
That's growth, Pat.
Thanks.
It's really good to see. Just to underline my point, like I think that Rawiri and Debbie are really good at what they do.
Right.
You know, I think they use their time in front of the camera generally pretty well. I think you'll agree that some of the most exciting political moments of this term have come from Te Pati Maori and the Toitu movement, and you know that's the Kapa-Kingis as well, right?
Well, there's an irony there though as well, isn't there? That I haven't read the post, but Eru did quite a long post the other day, which was basically I finally need to put this off out of my system, and I haven't looked at it properly yet, but the gist of it I get is like I finally have to put Te Pati Maori to bed, sort of thing.
I said this at the time, and this was the start of the rift. I don't think I realised at the time how bad it was going to be. But Toitu coming away from Te Pati Maori, I called that at the time as being a good move. You know? And like it might have been a good move happening for what turned out to be the wrong reasons, but I still think it's a good move that Eru has his own movement, his own machinery for campaigning, completely separate of Te Pati Maori.
Yes. All right. I like it that you say Debbie and Rawiri are good at what they do. What I'm good at doing is getting good freeze frames. So just before we finish for the night, one more time. There you go. There's just one to.
Oh, I'm going to clip that one as well. Sorry, I got the other one, and I've entitled it. Nikki is very disappointed in you.
Yeah. There you go.
This one I'm going to go. Nikki is very tired.
I have to apologise. I'm in the upstairs computer, and last night the credits were played because Ems was here and she was playing them. I don't have the credits on this computer, so we're not going to play any credits going out tonight. We're just going to say thanks to heaps of you, all of yous. And if I'm not back in my studio tomorrow, which I probably won't be, but if I'm not, I'll try and get the closing credits off Ems so I can actually play them as we go out. But we don't have them to play them as we're going out tonight, Chewy. So we might just say goodnight. Crazy as it sounds, you okay to just say goodnight?
Yeah, good night. I'm just getting messages from the Discord crew that they have already added those Nikki faces into the emoji bank.
Chris says John Tamihiri needs to go. And Overred Rover says, I don't give a shit. Might sell it though. I don't give a shit. Might sell it though. Okay.
Pat.
What time? Yeah.
Pat. Oh my God.
There's been some artwork going on, is there?
Look at it. Look at it. That is glorious.
Is that the head, which is the hello head from downstairs? Hello.
Yeah. Yeah. This is again a BHN Discord Hall of Famer at this point, Cybo Goblin.
Hello.
He's so quick on the Photoshop.
We've got one of them is hello, and the other one is hello.
Oh.
You can decide which is which. So.
Oh, it's so good.
All right. We're going to wrap up now, Whānau. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you, Chippy. That was great. I'm sure there'll be lots of smaller YouTube channels now cutting that up and telling us how shithouse we did at that interview as well, which is always fun to see. But thanks for being a part of us tonight, team. I'm glad all the tech pretty much seemed to work. I have the ability now to edit as well, so I am back to staying up until 1 a.m. to edit. And other than that, I think we're done, Chewy. Anything you want to leave us with? Hello.
Hello. Again, despite my earlier review, if you're able to find it, go and watch that documentary, 2,000 meters to Adifka. It is a phenomenal piece of work.
Cool bananas. All right, whānau. Well, we'll catch you tomorrow night from 9 p.m. Talking to Craig Rennie about doing something on the petrol prices. He's not sure whether he wants to do it as his own podcast yet this week or come on with us, but that's something that could be coming up in the second part of the week. And obviously, we'll stay on top of anything else that's going on. I guess the news now is it looks like Luxon is staying for the time being. Another question I wanted to ask Chippy at the end is, if Labor were at 28%, would he fall on his sword? Be interesting to have known that, but we kind of ran out of communications with him. Maybe I'll just message them and ask them to. We'll do like an old school reporter, Chewy, where you send them their questions and they respond in writing. And other than that, me and my 6 eyes right now, probably shouldn't wear the glasses on top of my hat, should I? It's kind of weird. We'll catch you all tomorrow night from 9 p.m. Chewy, it's a hooroo from me.
And it's a ta-ta for now from me.
That was weak. It feels weird not having music underneath, I say. So
ta-ta for now.
See you, team.
TTF. Stay cool till
Bye.
after school.
Cheers.